Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. I literally just got off a plane about 3 hours ago, coming back from Nashville, Tennessee. I spent a couple of days at the Stones River and Franklin battlefields, filming a total of eight videos for the channel, Stories of the Civil War. First one of those will be going up pretty soon. Learned a lot. A wonderful experience, two battlefields I had never been to. And that caused me to think about the fact that I've never really talked about the Battle of Franklin on this channel. Nor have I ever done a breakdown of one of the videos from History Gone Wilder, which is a Civil War history channel. So we're going to remedy both of those things today. We're going to take a look at part 4 of History Gone Wilder's Tennessee campaign series. I know I'm jumping into the middle of a series, but we aren't going to do the whole series, so specifically this is the part that deals with the Battle of Franklin. So I think it'll be great for us to break this down and talk about some of the details, because I think a lot of people, if they know anything at all about the Battle of Franklin, they think it was a suicidal frontal assault, it was a disaster, ill-advised, and while all of that is true, it was a lot closer of a battle than people realize, and if a few things had gone a different way, it was a very winnable battle for the Confederacy. So I don't think it would have changed the outcome of the war in any significant way, but we're going to take a look at this. I'll put the link down in the description, so if you like what you see from History Gone Wilder, definitely check out his channel. This, I think, will probably be a good indicator of what a lot of his videos are like, so hope you enjoy it. Let's dive in.
Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Have History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder. And last time, John Bell Hood moved the Army of Tennessee into northern Alabama. Now we join the Army as it marches into Tennessee. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. With the Army of Tennessee north of the Tennessee River.
So I guess since we haven't watched the first 3 episodes of this, let's real quick run down how they get to this point. So Atlanta falls, right? And, in the middle of defending the city of Atlanta, Jefferson Davis has removed Joe Johnston as the commander of the army. To back up even further, after Chattanooga, Braxton Bragg gets removed from command of the army. He becomes Jefferson Davis's senior military advisor, which is insanity, but that's what happened. And he is there advising Jefferson Davis when they're making a decision about whether John Bell Hood's or whether Joe Johnston's going to continue to command the Confederate Army defending Atlanta, because Davis and Bragg, by extension, feel like Johnston is being too defensive and that they need an aggressive strategy, which is, in hindsight, to me, ridiculous, because the Confederacy didn't have the resources to go on the offensive. Joe Johnston understood that. And Sherman would write later on that he didn't think they were capable of taking the city of Atlanta so long as Johnston's army was sitting in its strong fortifications. It was only when John Bell Hood is given command of the army and immediately goes on the offensive in July of 1864, launches the attacks that lead to battles on the 20th, I think, and then the 22nd, the big one, the Battle of Atlanta. That's what opens the door for Sherman to eventually be able to take the city of Atlanta. So Atlanta falls. John Bell Hood recognizes that he can't go toe-to-toe with Sherman's army, so he starts falling back into Alabama, and he's thinking about going on the offensive to retake Middle Tennessee. So Sherman shadows him for a while. They move north of the city, but then Sherman's like, you know what, forget this. I'm going on a march to the sea. We're heading to Savannah, and then we're going to cut up through the Carolinas. And so he detaches a part of his force, and then George Thomas is going to be in command over all of the troops that are going to have to make sure that Hood is not successful in what he wants to do. So long story short, there's maneuvering going on. There's Union armies that are going to now try to screen Hood's movement and protect the city of Nashville in central Tennessee. Nashville fell all the way back in the early part of 1862 after Forts Henry and Donelson fell. So the South has wanted it back ever since. Sherman's on his march to the sea. Hood's going to try and threaten the city of Nashville.
Began to march his army northward on November 21st, 1864. Benjamin Cheatham's corps was to the west, Stephen D. Lee's corps in the center, and Alexander P. Stewart's corps to the east.
Now, these are all men who basically had been given corps commands over a guy like Patrick Cleburne, who is the best general in the Confederate Army at this point, especially in the Western Theater. Cleburne, back at the end of 1863 into 64, if you haven't heard my podcast on Cleburne, definitely check that out. But he suggested... Cleburne's born in Ireland. He didn't grow up in the South. He's never owned a slave. And he suggests that they offer emancipation to all 4 million slaves in return for the black male slaves enlisting in the Confederate Army. It'll help their manpower problem. It'll help them with recognition by Europe because they're starting the process of emancipation. And the leadership of the Confederacy is just horrified by this, and once it's squashed, doesn't want anybody to hear about it. And Cleburne basically gets blacklisted at that point, so he gets repeatedly bypassed for Corps command by these other generals, and so he's going to remain at division command.
On the 24th, the Army concentrated at Henryville. Union General John Schofield with the 23rd and 4th Corps were at Pulaski, but when reports began to come in that the Confederate Army was on the move, they, likewise, began to move north.
So this is kind of a movement thing, right? It's everybody out trying to outmaneuver one another. Thomas is in Nashville. There are fortifications in Nashville. There's a fort in Franklin. There's forts in Murfreesboro. A lot of these places along the railroad especially have been fortified by the Union. Thomas is waiting for reinforcements to come in. They got a lot of brand new Union units because remember at this point, a lot of the original 3 years units that were enlisted in the fall of 1861 have now completed their enlistment. Many of the men have re-enlisted, and these become veteran volunteer infantry units, but many of them didn't. And so there's a whole new group of units that are coming in, and many of the men who are going to fight at Franklin are brand new to combat.
Hood intended to get between Schofield and Nashville and destroy Schofield's force before they could get into the fortifications of the capital. It was now a race to Columbia. Along the way, Hood's army was getting much-needed food as they captured a bunch of grist mills and put them into operation. Tennessee citizens cheered the advancing rebels as they marched through their towns. But despite the rapid marching, Schofield got to Columbia first and prepared defenses. George Thomas, Schofield's overall commander in Nashville, asked Schofield to delay the Confederates as much as possible. Andrew Smith's corps from Missouri was expected in the Tennessee capital soon, but he needed more time.
And all of this is being communicated rapidly. Remember, the Union has occupied Middle Tennessee for quite a while. They've got good telegraph lines going, and so there's pretty instant communication that's happening back and forth between Thomas and Nashville and Schofield out in the field. And Schofield does have to both delay Hood, but also keep falling back toward Nashville and hope that by the time they get into the fortifications at Nashville, they've gotten the reinforcements.
Hood missed his chance to cut off Schofield at Columbia, but he quickly came up with another plan. He left Lee's corps to confront Schofield at Columbia and make demonstrations to hold him in place, while he took the rest of the army to the east and crossed the Duck River.
And I have to say, Hood's conduct in this campaign up until Franklin isn't bad. He makes some pretty good choices. He's doing some strategic things that make sense, but there's a couple things about Hood that are important to keep in mind in the midst of all of this. Number one, most people who knew him didn't consider him to be a particularly intelligent guy. He's a tough fighter. He's aggressive. He's very personally brave. And the reason that he's given this army command is because he's so aggressive and brave. But he's not particularly intelligent, at least according to the people who knew him. He's also been severely wounded twice in the two bloodiest battles of the Civil War. He loses the use of an arm at Gettysburg on July 2nd, and then he loses his leg right below the hip at the Battle of Chickamauga, a grievous wound. He's taking laudanum, which is a painkiller, to help dull the pain. And some people think he's kind of like out of it half the time. So a lot of things going against Hood right now.
Nathan Bedford Forrest's cavalry screening their movement and pushing back the Federal cavalry. The plan was working extremely well thus far. Most of Schofield's cavalry under James Wilson pulled back toward Spring Hill, leaving Schofield blind to much of the Confederate Army's movements. However, he soon discovered something was happening and dispatched his wagon train and the division of George Wagner toward Spring Hill. To Schofield's credit, as well as Wagner's, the Union soldiers, pushed hard along the road from Columbia to Spring Hill and made it there by the early afternoon of November 29th.
Now, I'm going to give Wagner credit for this because I am going to rip him a new one on November 30th, okay? Keep that in mind.
Hood claimed that he saw the Union wagons and infantry marching towards Spring Hill and ordered Cheatham to launch an attack to capture them and the town. However,
I know I'm pausing a lot here, but think about this for a second. Franklin never happens if this is successful, right? If these two corps are able to take out Wagner and get behind Schofield's force at Spring Hill, Hood achieves his aim, which is to isolate and hopefully destroy a part of the Union Army, and then make it easier when he marches on Nashville, because now he's got a superior force to whatever Thomas has.
Cheatham, that was completely false, that the Union forces were already in the town by the time Hood allegedly ordered him to attack. Cheatham's statement is backed up by Union accounts as well. Nevertheless, Cheatham threw out Patrick Cleburne's division, which was in the lead, to attack the forces at Spring Hill. They engaged with Luther Bradley's brigade, pushing the Federals back, but an artillery barrage halted Cleburne's men, forcing them to take refuge in a stream bed. Cleburne was about to order an attack on the forces surrounding the town, but was ordered to halt by Cheatham. The Corps commander hoped to get support for Cleburne in the form of John C. Brown's division on the right. Cheatham told Cleburne to attack when he heard Brown make his attack, but no sounds of battle came.
Now look at this for a second. You're thinking to yourself, okay, if I'm this left flank, why aren't we swinging around on the Columbia Pike and trying to surround this Union force? Well, the rest of the Union Army's out there somewhere, and the Confederates don't know where, and so they're kind of prepared for that, thinking they're going to engage them there. But keep an eye on this Columbia Pike, because this is going to make all the difference on this day.
The generals involved after the war engaged in a war of words as to what exactly happened, but Cheatham's corps never got control of the Franklin-Columbia Turnpike. That night, one of the most surreal moments of the war took place. In the dead of night, with the Confederate Army of Tennessee within sight of the turnpike, Schofield and his two corps marched by the Confederates, keeping quiet to not disturb their sleeping foe.
They literally marched an entire army right under the noses of the Confederates. They were within 200 to 400 yards of them, like a quarter mile. They could see the road. The Confederates could. And Schofield marches his entire army within an eighth to a quarter of a mile right past the Confederates and slips into Franklin without them noticing.
The blue troops could see the campfires of the rebels as they passed. When Hood woke up on the morning of November 30th, he found the Federals gone. In the early morning hours, Schofield's lead units made it into Franklin, Tennessee. Hood was furious, had a meeting with some of his generals that morning at a plantation house. Cheatham being the only corps commander present, Hood berated his commanders for allowing the Federals to escape. There's no written record of what was said, but the lady who served the generals bacon and biscuits said that the language wasn't for ladies' ears.
Now, I've read about this account of what happened and the debate over who's responsible. And of course, you could argue ultimately Hood is responsible as the commanding general. But there also has to be some responsibility on those regimental and brigade commanders that were near that road that didn't spot what was happening right in front of them.
Hood followed Schofield to Franklin. In Franklin, Schofield knew he couldn't hold out long, so he ordered his engineers to start repairs on the bridge across the Harpeth River and to lay planks on the railroad bridge. As soon as the bridges were made accessible for wagons and artillery, the wagon train would begin their journey to Nashville. Then at dusk, the infantry and artillery would move out.
That wagon train had 800 wagons in it. At least that's what we were told in Franklin. And that's what they marched past the Confederate Army without being caught. And so the wagons are at the back. You've got Schofield digging in just long enough to, he's being prudent, right? He's digging in not because he's expecting to stand and fight at Franklin. He's digging in because he's protecting his rear while he gets these bridges built so they can get across. The whole point here is to get to Nashville as quickly as possible. It's not about staying and fighting the enemy.
The Federal soldiers began to fortify their location, expecting an attack by the Army of Tennessee. Upon their arrival on November 30th, Cox's men strengthened these old works and set about extending them.
So he mentions Cox. Jacob Cox, who's a future governor of Ohio, is in temporary command of Schofield's corps because Schofield is commanding elements of 2 Corps here. So Cox has temporary command of Schofield's Corps. And it's Cox that's going to actually set up his headquarters at the Carter House, which is going to be right at the center of the attack.
They tore down the Fountain Carter cotton gin house for its boards. They dug ditches in front of their parapets and placed headlogs with firing slits on top of them. The area south of Franklin was not wooded, but from an Osage orange hedge and locust grove they fashioned abattis against an expected rebel infantry charge. Their line's only vulnerability was along their Columbia Pike, where the road cut through the parapet, in which they left open, but with a retrenchment 200 feet behind.
Right. So all of this is going to become important because this is the place where the Confederates are going to break through the line. But there's more to why they were able to break through there than just that. But this is pretty remarkable. For the Union Army, first of all, they've been up all night, right? Because they had to sneak in past the Confederate force. The rear guard, which is under Emerson Updike from my hometown, the town I was born in, Warren, Ohio. That's where Updike is from. And Emerson Updike is the rear guard, and they're not going to get into Franklin until like 2 in the afternoon. And they've been up all night, and they haven't eaten. So these guys are exhausted, but they still dig some substantial defenses for a place they only expect to be a few hours.
Schofield put both of his flanks on the Harpeth River, with his back to the river, a precarious position if he was overrun.
So looking at this here, here's Franklin. The Confederates are going to be coming from the south here. The Harpeth River actually goes up. It goes up and around Franklin. So this is the Harpeth River. This is the Harpeth River. So it's actually a pretty smart defensive position if you're going to just sit tight for a little while. I don't know if he'll talk about what happened with Updike, but if he doesn't, I'll mention that.
The Army of Tennessee got within sight of Franklin, and Hood wasted no time laying out his plan.
So let's talk about this for a second. You see Lane and Conrad. So I mentioned Wagner earlier. Wagner is this division commander that had done well the day before at Spring Hill. Well, on this day, he's got 3 brigades, Lane, Conrad, Updike. He is actually placed in position good bit south of the main line. But his orders are to just kind of basically screen for the enemy, right? There's 2 miles of open field south of the Union position here. And if he makes contact, he's supposed to fall back. He's not supposed to try and hold off the entire Confederate army by himself. That's part 1. Part 2, Updike's the last brigade to arrive. He's the rear guard. He's marching in, and Wagner orders him to take his place on the front lines with his other 2 brigades. And Updike says, hell no, I'm not doing that. My guys haven't eaten, they haven't slept, they've been marching longer than anybody else because everybody else is already here. I'm taking them to get some food and some rest. And they fight about this for like a half hour, and while they're arguing about it, Updike's men are marching up past the Union position and well past where they're supposed to be. Finally, Wagner relents. So that's going to be a really key moment in this battle. 2 potentially battle-altering moments are going to happen, and they both have to do with Wagner's division.
Time was of the essence. With only a few hours of daylight left, he couldn't outflank Schofield before that general could withdraw to Nashville.
So the outflank thing is important here because he holds a meeting to talk about his idea to launch a full frontal assault with 20,000 men. Guys like Cheatham, Nathan Bedford Forrest, who commands the cavalry, or at least part of the cavalry, because I think Joe Wheeler's there as well. Or no, I'm thinking, I'm getting my battles confused. Joe Wheeler was at Stones River. I did Stones River 2 days ago, and I did Franklin yesterday. So Nathan Bedford Forrest is commanding the cavalry. Guys like Claiborne are there, and they're all saying, no, this is a bad idea. It can't possibly succeed. Forrest especially says, give me 1 good division of infantry, and I'll outflank them, and I'll win this battle for you. Hood says, no, it's going to be a frontal assault.
At a meeting with his generals at the William Harrison House, he said he would rather attack them here where they had only 18 hours to fortify, as opposed to Nashville, where they had been fortifying for 3 years.
I mean, that's sound in and of itself. Yeah, I'd rather hit them here than let them get into Nashville, but is this the best way to hit them here?
Many of his generals voiced concerns about an attack, but Hood was unswayed. At one point, he spoke with Claiborne about tactical matters, saying, give orders to your men not to fire a gun until you run the Yankee skirmish line from behind the first line of works into your front.
So how do they know so much? So Winstead Hill is a couple miles south of the Union lines. You go up there, it's an incredible view. You can see. Today there's a lot of trees. It's harder to see, but at the time it was all open farmland. So it's this wide open, beautiful open 2-mile field between the Union and Confederate lines. And so Hood and the other generals could get up there with their field glasses and they could see the Union had multiple lines of defense. What they couldn't see was Updike's men. He had a whole brigade that was back past the line and up and over the hill a little bit because the Carter House is kind of on high ground. So that's why the Union dug in right there. But behind the hill where the Confederates couldn't see is another brigade.
Then press them and shoot them in their backs as they run to their main line. Then charge the enemy's works. Claiborne replied, "General, I will take the works or fall in the effort."
And it's interesting that Hood says this because this is literally exactly what ends up happening.
Claiborne had been in the army since before Shiloh. He was born in Ireland and immigrated to the United States, settled in Helena, Arkansas. He was a lawyer and a pillar of that community when the war broke out.
Fantastic general.
Since joining the army, Claiborne quickly became known as one of, if not the most dependable division commanders in the entire army and arguably the Confederacy. He was so highly thought of that he was compared to the immortalized Stonewall Jackson, with some calling Claiborne the Stonewall of the West.
I mean, you look at the guy's performance record, and I defy you to find me another division commander in the Confederate Army who did better from start to finish in the war than Claiborne did.
Two of his best moments as a division commander came at Stone's River, where he wielded his division beautifully on the battlefield, and at Ringgold Gap, where he used his division to halt Joseph Hooker's attack, saving the Army of Tennessee's wagon train. Now he was ordered to make a desperate charge against the entrenched Federals at Franklin. Claiborne's staff and his subordinates noticed that when their division commander came to give them their orders, he was despondent. Usually their commander was excited to go into battle, but this time was different.
He knew.
General Govan said to Claiborne, "Well, General, there will not be many of us that get back to Arkansas." Claiborne responded by saying, "Well, Govan, if we are to die, let us die like men."
It's a very famous quote from Claiborne there, and one of the last quotes we have of him, of course, because he's going to die in this assault.
Claiborne then went to a small knoll where Confederate sharpshooters were positioned, and where he could get a good view of the ground that awaited him. He had left his field glasses behind, so he asked Lieutenant John Ozane of the sharpshooters if he could borrow a telescope. Ozane removed the telescope from his Whitworth rifle and handed it to Claiborne. He viewed the earthworks of the enemy and then said, "They are most formidable." He then rode off to organize his division. His men had to maneuver over nearly 2 miles, and he knew that every inch of ground would be contested by artillery.
And the Confederates themselves have very little artillery at this battle. It's a shockingly low number of artillery pieces. The Union, on the other hand, I think have something like 40 plus, and they're gonna put them to good use in this open field.
Claiborne rode along the ranks of his men. Some of them had followed him into battle ever since they left Arkansas. He told them to save their fire and use the bayonet. It was 4 o'clock and sunset was approaching.
Yeah, remember, this is late December. It's among the shortest days of the year, and so by 4 o'clock it's already getting dark.
Looked back toward Winstead Hill for the signal from Cheatham to advance. A signal flag was dropped, and Claiborne called out for his men to march forward. The Union line formed 2 battle lines, with Ruger and Riley's men occupying the main entrenchments, while an advance line under General Wagner, made up of Conrad and Lane's brigades, hoped to stall the Confederate onslaught.
So right over here about where McGavick's Ford is, over on this side, the McGavick family have their house. It's known as Carnton, and I did a video there. It's going to be one of the videos that you'll see from my trip, and they're going to set up a field hospital there for Loring's division, who's on the far right. And by the time they get there, they're already under significant Union artillery fire and taking casualties. Remember what I said about Wagner, though. He's got these 2 brigades out here, maybe 3,000 men. You got 20,000 bearing down on you. He's supposed to fall back. He has men under his command telling him the Confederates are coming. Do you think we should fall back? And Wagner says, no, absolutely not. We are staying here and fighting. He even orders the sergeants to, at the point of the bayonet, hold the men in place to keep fighting. He gets an order coming from Cox's headquarters at the Carter House, telling him to pull back. And he says, no, I'm going to stay here and fight, like an absolute moron.
The divisions of French, Walthall, and Loring poured past Wagner's advanced brigades and made contact with the main Union line first. French's division clipped Conrad's flank as they went by. Brown and Claiborne slammed up against Wagner's line, and it quickly crumbled, and blue troops began running to the protection of the entrenchments.
Remember, that's exactly what Hood told him was going to happen. You're going to chase them. You're going to be shooting them in the back as you go. Don't even fire a shot until you get to that point. And that's 100% what ends up happening. And what you've got right here at the center of the Union line are units like the 44th Missouri and the 100th Ohio. I know the 44th Missouri for sure has not really seen combat to this stage. So you've got some green units who haven't really seen combat.
When they broke, General John C. Brown, to Claiborne's left, yelled to Patrick that they will go into the works with them. Claiborne agreed and yelled to his men to go into the enemy's works with the running Federals. This would work to the Confederates' advantage. The Union troops in the main line would not fire because their comrades would be in their line of fire.
Right, so think about it. The left and right flanks of the Union line, they're pouring canister fire and small arms fire into the Confederate units and just tearing holes in the lines. In the center, where you've got your best division commander in Patrick Claiborne and you've got Brown next to him, nobody can fire. You've got cannons that are loaded with canister and double canister at times. But they can't fire because they'll hit their own men, because Wagner has stupidly not fallen back when he should have. So now you got 3,000 Union soldiers running towards you, and by the time they're able to open fire, the Confederates are already overrunning their works. That's why the Union line breaks in the center. So you have Wagner making a stupid decision, thinking he's being brave, and it almost cost the Union the battle. But thankfully, earlier, one of his subordinates not obeying orders is going to change the turn of the tide of this battle.
Here was the opportunity to break the Union line. It now became a race. Claiborne, still mounted, spurred ahead into the mass of men, charging diagonally across the front of his own brigades toward the center of the Union line. In mid-canter, his brown mare went down heavily, nose first, killed by rifle fire. Picking himself up, Claiborne called for another horse. A staff officer, Lieutenant James Brandon, rode up and dismounted quickly, offering the reins to Claiborne. Claiborne had one foot in the stirrup when this horse, too, fell to the ground, shot dead.
Goes to show you just how insane the fire was at the center of this line. And if you go there today, you go to the Carter house and their complex there, you can see the bullet holes, like in the farm office, hundreds of them. It's nuts. And the whole time, there's like 24 people in the Carter house in the basement, sheltering in place just yards from where all of this is going on.
Dropping the reins, Claiborne drew his sword and, waving it over his head, charged forward on foot toward the Yankee line, where he could see the men of his command clambering over the earthworks. Blue troops from the broken line fell into the freshly dug entrenchments, breathless from running. But their rest was short-lived because the Confederate brigades of Brown and Claiborne followed close behind, and a ferocious fight ensued. Claiborne's men smashed into the blue line. General Govan, the commander of one of Claiborne's brigades, recounted his last moments with the division commander. When that line was broken, General Claiborne's object seemed to be to run into the rear line with the fleeing Federals from Wagner's division. About that time, General Claiborne's horse was killed. His courier brought him another, and as he was in the act of mounting, this horse was killed. He then disappeared in the smoke of battle, and that was the last time I ever saw him alive. I spoke to his aide-de-camp and told him I was sure the general would be killed, as I did not see how he could escape with his life under such terrific fire, and as he never again appeared in the lines, confirmed my opinion that he was dead.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any firsthand accounts of actually seeing him go down. It's just that they know he was killed because they found his body the next morning.
The Union line broke under the weight of Brown's brigades. Brown's men held their own around the Carter house, not back.
And this is, most of the city of Franklin has overrun a lot of this battlefield, but this part right here on either side of the Columbia Pike, like the Carter house right here, and then where the cotton gin was on this side, this has all been preserved, and it's really, really cool to see.
And down until General Opdyke's brigade came from the reserves and pushed them back to the entrenchments.
So remember Updike behind the lines because he disobeyed Wagner's orders to keep his men out there. If he had kept his men out there, they would have been overrun too, and you wouldn't have much of a reserve back here. There was another unit of reserve back there, but Updike doesn't wait for orders. He sees the situation. He sees that the Confederates are breaking through to his position a couple hundred yards behind the line, and his men just launch a counterattack, and it saves the day.
However, Brown's division wouldn't give up the entrenchments. The brutal fight around Franklin continued. One soldier remembered, "I was near General Strahl, who stood in the ditch and handed up guns to those posted to fire them."
General Strahl, Confederate general from Ohio. He's one of at least three prominent Confederate generals, along with Quantrill and Bushrod Johnson from Ohio.
I'd passed to him my short infield about the sixth time. The man who had been firing cocked it and was taking deliberate aim, when he was shot and tumbled down dead in the ditch upon those killed before him. When the men so exposed were shot down, their places were supplied by volunteers until these were exhausted, and it was necessary for General Strahl to call upon others. He turned to me, and though I was several feet back from the ditch, I rose up immediately, and walking over the wounded and dead, took position with one foot upon the pile of bodies of my dead fellows, and the others in the embankment, and fired guns which the general himself handed up to me until he too was shot down.
There are descriptions after the battle of this area around where the fortifications are being so stacked with bodies that some of the bodies were still upright because they were just one on top of another, pressed against each other up against the parapet. I mean, I've never read accounts of bodies so stacked up the way that they were in this area around the Carter House and the Cotton Gin.
I asked the general for counsel. He simply answered, "Keep firing." But just as the man to my right was shot and fell against me with terrible groans, General Strahl was shot. He threw up his hands, falling on his face, and I thought him dead. But in asking the dying man, who still lay against my shoulder as he sank forever, how he was wounded, the general, who had not been killed, thinking my question was to him, raised up, saying that he was shot in the neck, and called for Colonel Stafford to turn over his command. He crawled over the dead, the ditch being 3 deep, about 20 feet to where Colonel Stafford was. His staff officers started to carry him to the rear, but he received another shot, and directly the third, which killed him instantly. They continued to fight, but the Union forces gained the advantage. Other small breakthroughs would occur along the line, with another significant one being at the Carter Cotton Gin by Claiborne and French's men. After most of the fighting had ended, Bates' division formed and proceeded to attack. But their attack...
Yeah, so this is about 7 o'clock when you have this secondary attack that happens on the Confederate left. The main attack had gone off a little after 4 o'clock, so they've been fighting for a couple hours at this point.
Stalled out without any support to their right. They were nearly alone. They would ultimately be thrown back, and it was now 7 o'clock, and darkness had covered the battlefield. Edward Allegheny Johnson, now commanding Patton Anderson's division, when that general was wounded, launched his own assault, getting into the Union entrenchments and capturing 3 enemy flags, but they too were repulsed. It was now 9 p.m., and the Battle of Franklin came to an end after 5 hours of bloody fighting.
10,000 casualties in 5 hours. I mean, insanity.
Cheatham rode over the battlefield by torchlight, seeing the destruction. He came to General Hood with tears running down his face, crying, as one witness said, like a child. He and Stuart gave the commanding general the gloomy report that their commands were destroyed. Lee offered the only positive words. Lee's corps, except for Johnson's division, was fresh and ready to do any work Hood ordered. Hood informed them that they would continue the fight tomorrow, determined to destroy Schofield's force before it got to Nashville. All the artillery that could be mustered would fire 100 rounds into the enemy at 7 a.m. Then at 9 a.m., the infantry would move in. Schofield wouldn't give him the chance to continue the fight, though. At 11 p.m., he started moving his army north, and by 2 a.m., all of Schofield's troops were across the Harpeth River.
These men just must have been so exhausted. They had marched all night to escape from Spring Hill. They get into Franklin. They have to dig fortifications. They fight a 5-hour battle, and then they're back on the march to escape from Franklin to get up toward Nashville. It's crazy what the human body is capable of.
By 4 a.m., the Confederates entered the town. It was December 1st, and the day was filled with the corps of Cheatham and Stuart collecting the dead and dying.
You got a town of 750 people with 10,000 casualties.
One of the dead was Todd Carter, the son of the Carter family, whose home and outbuildings became part of the battlefield. Within sight of his home, Todd was killed, shot in the head during the engagement.
Yeah, so remember earlier I showed you the 44th Missouri, most likely from what I could see when I was standing in the spot, probably the 44th Missouri fire that killed Todd Carter. Theodric Carter was his name. You'll see his grave and hear his story from my video there. He was a captain in the 20th Tennessee and hadn't been home for a couple of years. And one of the last things anybody heard him say that day was, he said, "I'm going home," as they launched an attack on his home. And he died, or was mortally wounded in the garden of his family home and brought into the house, and he died in the parlor of his own house.
A Mississippian remembered finding the body of Major General Patrick Claiborne. I and 2 others were the first to discover his dead body at early dawn the next morning. He was about 40 or 50 yards from the works. He lay flat upon his back as if asleep, his military cap partly over his eyes. He had on a new gray uniform. It was unbuttoned and open. The lower part of his vest was unbuttoned and open.
Now, that could mean 2 different things. One, I believe he had his jacket open when the battle started. It was like 60 degrees that day. It was a decently warm day for late December. But also, very often, if you look at the photos of bodies on Civil War battlefields, you'll see their jackets opened. He was shot in the chest, and if he survived initially the wound, he may have been opening his shirt trying to see where he was hit and how bad it was, or somebody else might have been trying to help him, or maybe it happened after when the Union soldiers were going through and found his body.
Or a white linen shirt which was stained with blood on the front part of the left side, or just left of the abdomen. This was the only sign of a wound I saw on him, and I believe it is the only one he had received.
I've read accounts that say he was shot multiple times, but it sounds pretty clear he only had 1 bullet.
I've always been inclined to think that, feeling the end was near, he had thus laid himself down to die, or that his body had been carried there during the night. He was in his sock feet, his boots having been stolen. His watch, sword belt, and other valuables were all gone, his body having been robbed during the night. Crews designated to clean up the battlefield removed the generals who perished in the fight and took some of them to the Carnton plantation home.
So there's a famous story that supposedly says that all 6 generals, Confederate generals that were killed in the battle, were laid on the porch, the back porch of the Carnton house. I'm going to show that in the video too. It wasn't all 6. One of them wasn't even dead yet. He died a couple days later. It was actually 4 of them, Claiborne, and then 3 of the brigade commanders that were laid on the Carnton house porch. Carnton house was turned into a hospital for Loring's division. There were like 300 men inside the house and another couple hundred outside the house.
Hood rode into the town, visibly shaken from the destruction around him. He began to cry as he sat in the saddle. The battle took the lives of 5 Confederate generals, Patrick Claiborne, John Adams, States Rights Gist, Otho Strahl, and Hiram Granberry. John C. Carter would die on December 10th from the wounds sustained in the battle, bringing the total general officers killed to 6. Other generals were wounded, including John C. Brown, Arthur Manigault, William Quarles, Zachariah Dees, Jacob Sharp, Thomas Scott, and Francis Cockrell.
Yeah, so you got 14 generals killed or wounded, something like a little over 50 regimental commanders killed or wounded. That's more than half the ones that participated in the attack.
George Washington Gordon in Brown's division was captured. The attacks at Franklin removed many experienced commanders from combat, something Hood desperately needed if he wanted to continue the campaign. In addition to the 14 generals as casualties, 54 regimental commanders were either killed, wounded, or captured. In all, the Confederacy lost 6,252, 1,750 killed, 3,800 wounded.
The killed was like 10 to 1.
702 missing and captured. All within 5 hours of combat, which exceeded the number killed at Stones River and Chickamauga respectively, both of them taking place over multiple days. The Union lost 2,326, 189 killed, 1,033 wounded, and 1,104 missing and captured. In all, 8,578 troops became casualties in those 5 bloody hours.
Typically, the number I've read is around 10,000, but listen, anytime we're talking about the American Civil War and we're talking about casualty numbers, you're going to have wildly varying numbers. Same goes for the number of men involved in the attack. I read multiple sources that said 20,000. The tour guide at Franklin said it was 25,000 Confederates that launched the attack. I saw a sign there that said 19,000. So it's all estimates, and somewhere in the middle is the truth.
November 30th at Franklin stands as one of the top 5 deadliest days in American military history.
All right, that was good. I think that was a great overview of the battle and gave us a chance to break it down and talk about it a little more. If you haven't already checked out my channel, Stories of the Civil War, that's where all those videos are going to be going up in the coming weeks. The link is in the description. You can check that out, as well as my podcast about Patrick Claiborne. That link's down there as well. And check out History Gone Wilder if you like what you see. Thanks for watching.